Looking back, I wish I could say the love we shared was enough to conquer everything. But life isn't a fairy tale, is it? I married Amy, my first love, my confidant, the woman I believed would stand beside me through every storm. We were together for 2.5 years, and for much of that time, I thought we were unbreakable. But love is a fragile thing. It doesn't survive on promises alone. Amy had this laugh, bright, infectious. I remember our first road trip together, driving down the coast with the windows down, her hair whipping around her face as she sang along to every song on the radio. Those were the days when everything felt easy, like we were building a world just for the two of us. I couldn't imagine life without her. She was my anchor, my home. But then came the first crack. 3 months ago, I started noticing changes. Her distracted eyes, the way she seemed distant even when she was right next to me. It was subtle at first, like the way she'd hurriedly put her phone away when I entered the room, or how she suddenly seemed to have so many plans without me. She said she needed space to clear her mind, and I wanted to respect that. But something didn't sit right. There were too many late-night work calls, too many moments when her phone buzzed, and she'd glance at it with a look I couldn't quite place. One evening, I finally worked up the courage to confront her. "Amy, is there something going on? You've been so distant lately," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. She laughed it off, calling me paranoid, even teasing me for being so suspicious. "You're overthinking, babe," she said, brushing past me. Her words should have been reassuring, but the nervous edge to her voice and the way she avoided my eyes told a different story. For weeks, I tried to ignore the nagging doubt, but it consumed me. One night I woke up around midnight to find her side of the bed empty. My heart sank as I heard her hushed voice coming from the living room. Quietly, I crept to the door, listening. She was on the phone, and though she was speaking softly, I caught fragments of the conversation. Words like "miss you" and "can't stop thinking about you." My stomach churned. When I confronted her the next morning, I was calm but direct. "Who were you talking to last night, Amy?" Her face turned pale, but she quickly recovered, shaking her head. "No one. I couldn't sleep, so I called Sarah. You know how she's always up late?" she said, forcing a smile. I wanted to believe her, but the lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. Still, I couldn't accuse her without proof. My mind spiraled with questions, doubts, and worst-case scenarios. A week later, I decided to stop second-guessing myself and started digging. I looked at her phone bill, something I'd never done before. One number stood out. She'd been calling and texting it almost every day. My blood ran cold when I traced the number back to her ex-boyfriend. Determined to find the truth, I waited. One evening, she told me she was heading out to catch up with an old friend. I didn't argue, didn't even let on that I knew. Instead, I followed her. My heart pounded as I parked a few cars away and watched her walk into a quiet little cafe. I sat there staring at the door until I saw him walk in, her ex. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed more than just suspicion. After nearly an hour, I followed them as they left the cafe together. They walked down the street laughing like nothing else in the world mattered, and then they turned into a side alley. That's where I saw it, the kiss. My stomach dropped as I watched the woman I loved, the woman I trusted, in the arms of another man. They didn't see me, and for a moment, I just stood there frozen. Then I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped forward and called out her name. Amy spun around, her face a mix of shock and horror. "Oh my God, what are you doing here?" she stammered, stepping away from him. I ignored her, my eyes locked on her ex. "So this is your old friend?" I asked, my voice cold and sharp. He didn't say a word, just looked at me with the guilty expression of someone caught in the act. Amy tried to explain, stumbling over her words, but I wasn't listening. The betrayal was too overwhelming. I turned and walked away, her voice calling after me, but I didn't stop. In that moment, I knew our marriage would never be the same. I was devastated, but I couldn't let go of the woman I loved. She begged for another chance, tears streaming down her face, and I believed her when she said she was sorry. She promised therapy, honesty, and change, and I wanted to believe her. Love is funny that way. It makes you hope, even when the evidence is stacked against it. For months, we tried. She made efforts to reassure me. We laughed again, shared quiet mornings over coffee, and tried to patch the wounds with shared moments of normalcy. But inside, I was still bleeding. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every suspicious moment, every lie she'd told. Even when she was right next to me, I couldn't shake the image of her with someone else. The intrusive thoughts became my constant companions. When she'd leave for work or visit family, I'd wonder, is she really where she says she is? Is she thinking about me or about him? I wanted to trust her. I really did. But trust isn't something you can will into existence. It has to be built brick by brick, and the foundation we'd once had was shattered. One evening, we sat in the living room, her flipping through a magazine and me pretending to read a book. The silence was heavy, charged with everything we weren't saying. Finally, I put the book down and said, "Amy, I can't do this anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. I think deep down she knew. We'd both been trying so hard, But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the damage is too deep, and the effort to rebuild feels like carrying a weight that only grows heavier. The first few weeks after the breakup were brutal. I missed her laugh, her presence, the way she'd steal my fries even when she swore she wasn't hungry. But I also felt relief, a strange, bittersweet relief. The constant anxiety, the second-guessing, the sleepless nights, it was all gone. I've spent a lot of time reflecting since then. Was breaking up the right choice? Could I have given her more time to prove herself? Maybe, but the truth is, I needed to save myself. Love shouldn't feel like a battle for your sanity. Amy taught me so much, not just about love, but about boundaries, self-respect, and the importance of listening to your gut. I learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation, and that walking away can be an act of self-love. If there's one thing I've taken from this, it's this. Trust is the foundation of any relationship. Once it's broken, it takes two people, unwavering effort, and an honest heart to rebuild, and even then, it's not always enough. To anyone listening who's been where I've been, know this: you're not alone. It's okay to grieve, to feel angry, to love someone and still choose to let them go. Healing takes time, but it starts with putting yourself first. You deserve love that feels safe, trustworthy, and whole. And as for me, I'm still healing, still figuring out what's next. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm breathing again. And that, I think, is a start.